What's up everyone, it's Shaf, aka That Mill Guy, coming at you with another strategy video, and today we're going to be straying super far from God with this one. We are betraying ourselves. We're talking about how to beat the mill mirror. Now before we hop into that though, look, I'm stuttering because we need to talk about something serious here. If you just want to go into the mill stuff, just skip maybe 60 seconds ahead. But look, serious stuff here. I need your opinion. This video is being filmed in 24 frames per second 4K. That's not a flex. Don't worry about the 4K. The 24 is what matters. I did a little bit of research on cinematography and some stuff on lighting, and regardless, look, 24 frames per second is apparently providing a more cinematic feel, something a little bit more homey. Let me know what you think. All my previous videos have been filmed in 1080p, 60 frames per second. So a lot smoother, more hyper realistic, maybe not, as cinematic. So let me know what you think about this. If this is what you want to see in the channel moving forward, I personally think it's going to look well. I don't know what it's going to look like right now. I got to go into my post work first, like through Premiere, then I'll see it. But I feel like this is going to be that kind of good, kind of in-ground. I got kind of my background nice and everything. Let me know what you think. I really need your opinion on this in the comment section down below. Now, let's hop right into it. How to beat the mill mirror. Now, from the top, why do we need to know this? Look, if you need to ask yourself that question, you've been living under a damn rock. Ruin Crab and Maddening Cacophony have literally flipped the modern metagame on its high horse. Mill players out the wazoo, upsetting all the Titan decks. I'm seeing Gaia's Blessings as a 4 of, according to some reports in the Mill Discord. Real hate. Y'all talking about how Mill is a tier 3 deck, but you need to be playing 4 Gaia's Blessing? Really? Anyway, there's a lot of Mill players around, and not only is Mill taking over the modern meta, but hey, look, you're really going to be coming across that rare mill player at least like once every other league. I don't know. That's what I was finding on my stream. So I found it extremely relevant to at least play high impact cards that not only affected the rest of the modern metagame, but was also able to leverage some game against the mirror. Now, before we understand that, we really need to kind of take a look at some of the pros and cons of the mill archetype and really see how we can weaponize that against ourselves. So some of the pros are that mill is really good at tackling linear strategies that rely on a few cards. I'm thinking decks like Charbelcher decks, where if you surgical one piece, the whole deck falls apart, or the big mana strategies such as Primetime or Primeval Titan decks or Tron decks, where they still have long game, they still have an ability for a game plan, but if you take out cards like Primetime, you surgical out a Tron land, they really slow down to your pace. That's where Mill wants to be. Those are the decks that Mill wants to face. The trouble comes in the quantity decks. So the decks that don't have those quality cards, they have a wide variety of threats. So think of decks like Jund, where they go in from hand disruption, taking away your piece, then a threat, and then a planeswalker, which is a whole different card type. And it's like, oh, you already had your fatal push, but you don't have a way to deal with the planeswalker. It kind of gets out of control. And then you have the red aggressive strategies, where think about surgicaling a lightning bolt, and then all of a sudden your opponent opens up with lava spike into, I don't know, light up the stage, whatever you're playing against. Maybe it's prowess. Yeah, that kind of feels bad. You took out lightning bolt, but they still have like a million other 3 damage spells. Another section where Mill really struggles, but hey, the deck's got to lose to something. So we have issue dealing with decks that have a wide variety of different threats, but a very good time dealing with cards that have specific threats. The problem is Mill is somewhere in the middle. Mill is really a mid-range tempo style deck. We have those games where against maybe something like humans, you're under a ensnaring bridge or something like that. You got a mesmeric orb out, you're slowly grinding them out. Or we have those games where you got like 3 archive traps in hand, you field to ruin them, mill them for 50 million, you draw 3 cards, you're playing vintage, you're playing ancestral recall, all that good stuff. And then you really just have games in between from there. How do we take that concept and weaponize it against ourselves? Because it's like we're kind of facing our worst and our best enemy. It's kind of funny to think about that way. But how do we beat the mill mirror? Well, talk about it conceptually before we hop into the cards. This is really, in game 1, it's like most mirrors, it comes down to play draw. It's a little like playing in between the Jund mirror and the Tron mirror. Whereas the Tron mirror is really just, it's kind of just play draw. And the Jund Mirror just comes down to quality of top decks. So that's where mill can be, because sometimes you have those games where, you know, one player is just drawing more mill spells, and then all of a sudden the opposing player just searches their library, and then you're just holding up like 3-4 archive traps. They're done. And then there are those games where like both of you draw your fatal pushes to try and answer your opposing Hedron crabs, and then like your only other mill spell is Miss Mirror, and you're like, ugh. So let's talk about some specific cards that beyond the first game scenario that can really just come down to how many surgicals did you draw to take care of those mill spells and, you know, kind of stuff like that. How can the post-board games be better? Well, in the post-board games, first and foremost, I mentioned Surgical Extraction. We can bring in cards like Extirpate as extra copies of Surgical Extraction to really maximize on that effect. If they go off with a Maddening Cacophony, they put one off. Surgicaling the other 3 copies is huge, because if you think about a scenario where even on your graveyard, with Visions of Beyond being a dual check system with both graveyards, so if your graveyard has 20 cards in it, your Visions and your opponent's Visions will be on. That's obvious. But let's say they have their Visions and you already surgical their Maddening Cacophony, that's a lower chance of them actually drawing mill spells. That's pretty damn good. You're reducing the quantity of mill spells that they have and also the quality at the same time. So extra copies of those effects are great. If you don't have mill targets, hit their Polluted Delta, hit their Field of Ruins, hit those enablers that force you to search your library so their archive traps don't go off unless you want them to. Another card that we can talk about is, well, Ashiok Dreamrender. Personally, one of my favorite mill cards ever to be printed. Stopping your opponent from searching their library is huge, just because your opposing mill player is going to be having Field of Ruin effects, fetch lands that they want to be getting double Hedron Crab, Ruin Crab triggers off of. That's kaput. Also, exiling their graveyard to keep yourself ahead. Let's say they are just about to, maybe they start milling themselves to turn on their Visions of Beyond. You stop that right away, you stay ahead and continue to mill them that way. Let's go into some of the other archetypes. I'm talking Sultai Mill. Right now in my Patreon sideboard guide, I 110% recommend playing a card like Gaia's Blessing. I'm playing it in the sideboard. You can play it in the mill board as a surprise factor. In those matchups where it doesn't really come into effect outside of mill, hey, whatever. You shuffle back in a Field of Ruin for your scape shift plan right now. Shuffle back in a Field of Ruin, whatever it is. But in the mill matchup, shuffles the whole deck back in. Although counter synergy against Uro, you don't really care about that, because a lot of times in the post board you don't bring in Uro against the mill matchup anyway, so it doesn't really matter. In the, well, Esper and Azorius matchups, yo, your lights out card straight up is Leyline of Sanctity. There's no excuse for you to not be playing Leyline of Sanctity. One of the big pills right now to Azorius Mill is the fact that it's supposed to have a fantastic matchup against the red strategies. One of the bigger holes in the mill strategy, playing Leyline of Sanctity, fantastic life gain spells such as Timely Reinforcements, and even having stuff like Celestial Purge to get rid of some of those pesky red permanents such as Blood Moon. Fantastic archetype. Play that Leyline of Sanctity, because even though they have Ruin Crab and Maddening Cacophony, guess what? With Leyline out, not only do you have those cards as well, but guess what? Your Hedron Crabs, your archive traps are actually active, whereas your Dimir Mill opponent is sitting there drawing cards with their Visions of Beyond. They're looking in their hand like, well, they searched their library, but that archive trap isn't really going off. So definitely something to think about there. So it's really just about bringing in these cards that have the multimodal effectiveness against other decks in Modern, but have that all-around effect against mill. You don't want specificate, you want these cards that affect everything. Some spicy, well, not so much spicy really, just some fun includes are really cards like Collective Brutality, just because it's able to kill Hedron Crab as well as get a spell out of their hand. Not so much Ruin Crab anymore. You want to think of counter spells such as Mystical Dispute or Spell Pierce. I personally prefer Spell Pierce just because it has game against the red strategies as well. And then finally, you want to be thinking about cards like Cling to Dust, which are able to stop your opponent from exiling one of your cards, and hey, as a value, you're able to potentially draw a card from there. Now, finally, the last thing I want to mention is you really need to be bringing in Fatal Push against your opponent. Remember that with 8 creatures out now, that's going to be extremely important that you're able to deal with all those crabs and stop them from making you mill. Now, that's really going to be about it. Shout out to the Patreon for help keeping the quality high and the lights on. Thank you for all the support here and helping me get this, this new 24 frames per second setup and everything. If you want exclusive mill strategy and sideboard guides for all the new archetypes, how to beat mill, how to beat all the new rising tier 1 strategies, the Patreon is where you want to join. But that's going to be about it. Let me know what you think about this video in the comment section down below. Do you love 24 frames per second? Do you love 60? What do you think? What are your strategies for beating Mill? Let me know in the comment section down below. Remember that even the impossible is possible. And as we ponder that thought, I hope you'll join me next time as we take a glimpse into the unthinkable.